Those people are part of the reason why we have so many problems in the world. This is selfish, unfair, just toxic. Break the wheel first. It contributes to mental illness, crime, and unfulfilled lives. Don't have kids. Do you have a moral obligation to fix your issues and childhood traumas before you bring children into this world? Many people say yes, absolutely. Why? Because trauma and abuse are passed down through generations unless someone breaks the wheel. Period. Still, since nearly 1 in 3 people are influenced by childhood trauma and many won't resolve it, does that mean that a huge part of our population is responsible to stay childless? And would that cause a population decline as a consequence? And if not, are we then becoming an increasingly sick society? This and much more we will cover in today's episode. Let's get straight into that heated topic. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert, and today's episode is all about discussing the question, should you sort out your trauma before having kids? And I want to start this episode by directly jumping into the topic. So let's address this very controversial question directly at the beginning. Now, the idea that people should sort out their trauma before having kids comes from the belief that unresolved issues get passed on through generations. And we discussed that concept of transgenerational trauma, which it is basically, in a previous episode, which I will link to you up here and in the description below. This is basically the idea of a potential trauma history or trauma concept I came up with in that specific video. And what you see here is on the complete left side, there's the skull and the moment of death we will all experience at some point. Then we have the person here. That's basically you, that's basically me. And the line on the complete left side, that's our current lifetime. And everything besides that on the right side, this is potential trauma history. So we see adult PTSD, so traumatizing events in our own adult history. Then we see childhood PTSD. This is our childhood, things we experienced during our childhood. And then there is the moment of birth. That's also still our lifetime, but it's in the past. And everything besides that on the right side are things that happened before our moment of birth. So prenatal trauma, but also transgenerational trauma, and also collective trauma, cultural trauma, reincarnational trauma. So everything that influences or influenced in the past our genes, influenced maybe how we developed as a human being, what we bring into our current life. So all the good things, but also things we learn to avoid, for example. That's basically the idea of transgenerational trauma. As a definition here, basically trauma that was passed on from previous generations. And to put it in one sentence, transgenerational trauma is the psychological and physiological effects that the trauma experienced by people on subsequent generations in that group. The primary mode of transmission is the shared family environment of the infant, causing psychological, behavioral, and social changes in the individual. Now, some people argue because of that if we continue to pass down unresolved trauma from generation to generation, we risk becoming an increasingly emotionally sick society. The cumulative impact of unhealed trauma can indeed show up in widespread mental health issues, but in my personal opinion, that still doesn't mean that we are completely doomed because of that. As long as we create awareness and make efforts to break that cycle. Nevertheless, it's also important to remember that not everyone with unresolved trauma ends up passing it on in the same way. Very important, because many parents work really hard to shield their children from their own difficulties they experienced. Still, in general, through the concept of transgenerational or even collective trauma, unaddressed emotional wounds of the parents may definitely impact their children and by extension also society in a negative way. And therefore, sorting out your trauma first, or at least trying to create as much awareness for it as possible before having kids, sounds like a very good and fair idea. So, apart from that, the next controversial question could be, are unhealed parents then part of the reason we have so many problems in the world? If we really try to find that trigger point there, because it is one. Now, this opinion has its origin in the idea that individual trauma truly has an influence on society and even culture. So, if we remember the slide where I presented the ideas of trauma history, then now we talk about the complete right side, where we talk about collective or societal trauma. So everything that really influences society and our culture from a top level, from a bird's eye perspective here. Now, therefore, some argue that the collective impact of generations of unresolved trauma contributes to larger societal issues such as mental health crisis, like depression or the loneliness crisis we also see a lot now, especially on social media here. Dysfunctional relationships, another topic. Are we even capable of having healthy relationships in our current society? And also things like violence, war, also influenced definitely by that. And from this perspective, people who won't address their trauma before becoming parents might indeed perpetuating these problems. On the other hand, critics say this view oversimplifies complex social issues. I always emphasize on this channel here in my episodes that we are hyper-complex individuals living in a hyper-complex world and society. While trauma can influence behavior, is not the sole reason for societal problems. Blaming parents alone ignores other factors such as poverty, education, and access to mental health resources such as therapy or a supportive environment. By the way, in order to make mental health support more affordable, I also started an online platform for people with CPTSD, highly sensitive and neurodivergent people. And this community is an affordable safe place and a healing environment, including a learning platform where I'll share all of my experiences and my knowledge from my work with 3 different therapists and 3 different therapy approaches. And you can also access this full platform, including the community and the online courses, as a member. Just go to understandable.net/join and join today. Another point of view is the point of self-responsibility and ethics here. A moral argument is, should people be held responsible for resolving their trauma before becoming parents? Some feel it's an ethical duty to work on one's mental health before bringing children into the world, but this view can also feel a bit unrealistic in a way. And that's because trauma work is a lifelong process, and we all know that, and not something with a clear end, and you just cannot remove trauma and all your triggers just like this. It's just not possible in this world. So you have to start early on if you want to resolve and heal. And many of us aren't in our early 20s or 30s anymore when we realize all the baggage we're carrying and all the baggage we carried for such a long time. One thing I also definitely like to emphasize is that the world is not just black or white. So nobody is perfect, and don't we all carry some stuff around? With a total prevalence of 28%, not including unreported cases, nearly every 3rd person has a traumatic past. And this is data from one of my favorite papers, Adult Survivors of Childhood Trauma. I'll link that paper as well in the description below. Now, if we don't allow at least 1/3 of our population to have kids, what would be the consequences of that? Would it cause a population decline due to the significant drop of birth rates? If people waited until they felt entirely ready or entirely healed, resolve all their problems, we might see fewer people choosing to become parents after all. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Well, and what does fully healed or fully resolved even mean? Because healing isn't always linear, and some might never feel healed enough, potentially leading to a demographic shift here. I also disagree because life doesn't always wait for us to sort ourselves out before major milestones like starting a family. Many people grow through the process of parenting itself and learning and healing as they go. Some parents who have gone through rough childhoods themselves even gain a lot of strength just because they experienced adversity in their childhood. They use their experiences to become more empathetic and protective, striving to give their children the kind of upbringing they never had. In this case, it could be argued that healing and growth happen during the parenting journey, not just before it. So how does trauma in particular even influence our parenting, or which impact has trauma on parenting in specific? So there is research suggesting that trauma can shape how we parent, often leading to behaviors like being overly protective, emotionally distant, or having difficulties with things like boundaries. And these traits can also affect a child's development, that's for sure, potentially perpetuating cycles of dysfunction. Now, does that mean that you're doomed when you're a parent already? Because I guess many of you who watch that have kids already, and maybe you think, well, I haven't sorted out all of my trauma. Is that a huge problem now? So what can you do if you now watch this and think, shit, I'm already a mom, I'm already a dad, and I didn't sort out my shit before? Well, first of all, don't blame yourself and don't be too hard with you now. Or how Gabo Mate once said in a podcast, no worries, it doesn't matter how hard you try, because we will all fuck it up. And yes, probably we will all do mistakes. There is no perfect childhood because we are all human beings. What is true is that it's never too late to start healing. Being kind to yourself is crucial here. Parenting is challenging enough without adding self-blame and shame here. Therapy, support groups, and other resources can help you and other parents to navigate their own healing while raising children. This can reduce the impact of their trauma on children and help them develop healthier relationships. Okay, so no kids before sorting out our traumas? Well, like everything in this world, the answer is not as clear as the opinion would suggest. Fact is, unresolved trauma can certainly affect parenting and society. Yes, but is waiting to become a perfectly healed parent even realistic? No, because life doesn't work like this. I think in the end, the key isn't necessarily to be fully healed, because that would be impossible for a living being, or at least for most of us, I guess. Instead, I would suggest a point of view where we are aware of our patterns and to continuously make conscious efforts to prevent them from impacting the next generations. What matters most is the willingness to recognize when it's necessary to take steps to break that cycle we're in. This means constantly recognizing triggers, practicing emotional regulation, and seeking help and professional therapy when needed, even if it's during the parenting journey. And we are all on a journey, and if you're already a parent, there is no shame in continuing your healing along the way. I would like to finish this episode positively and with 3 rules of thumb that we can all keep in our minds. First of all, always try to at least become aware of your issues, topics, and challenges. Number 2, always try to resolve things. Number 3, Always think of your children first, also if that means that you have to seek therapy or leave your comfort zone, because healing is not comfortable, it's painful. So very important, take responsibility for your own healing. Don't put yourself in a role of victim here, and always try to remind those 3 rules. Again, number 1, always try to become aware of your challenges. Number 2, always try to resolve things, taking responsibility. And number 3, always think of your children first. And if you now look for an affordable way of accelerating your healing journey, I also want to remind you again that we have an online platform as an addition to common therapy. It's not a substitute, not a replacement, is an addition here, because our community is a safe space for people with CPTSD, neurodivergent people, highly sensitive people, and we also offer guiding online courses that show you a step-by-step path on how to resolve symptoms of CPTSD. If you're currently in therapy, this is probably a really, really good addition that you can work through by yourself and maybe also use those resources in your current process of healing and therapy. We have all the resources and support you need to re-regulate your nervous system, and you can access this full platform, including the community, by becoming a member, going to understandable.net/join. I also put the link in the description, understandable.net/join. And now I'm really curious, what do you think? Sorting all the trauma out before having kids, or is that a bit unrealistic? And as you become aware and constantly try to recognize and resolve triggers and challenges, does that also work as becoming a parent and healing on the way? Definitely let me know in the comments. Also, if you want to support that podcast, leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, give me a subscribe here on YouTube. And I see and speak to you next Sunday for another episode here on the channel. Have a great day.